Today I wanted to go over some of the things we've learned as we've started our homestead. Hopefully they'll help you out as well. First thing, buy the right property. You can change just about anything else about your homestead, but you can't change. Once you buy that piece of land, you can't change that. So although it might seem tempting to spend a little less or to settle for a property that doesn't seem too bad at the time, that in the end that's not going to work very well for you, because those little things eventually will become big things. And unlike anything else on your homestead, you just can't fix that. The piece of property you have is the piece of property you have. For us, one of the big things that we liked about our piece of property was that it was already partially developed. Where we're at, there's a lot of tall timber. To clear that tall timber, it's going to take about $30,000 to $40,000 worth of investment just to clear a building site, if you have to pay somebody to do that. Plus then you got to haul in gravel because it's pretty boggy. So you're looking $30,000 to $50,000 just for the building site. The piece of property we found had already been cleared. That's a huge savings, something that we didn't have to put into our piece of property. Our piece of property, because it's cleared, also is going to make it easy to grow a garden. If you're in deep, dark timber, you're not going to be able to grow a garden. It also has water on it. Having water tends to make a piece of property more expensive, but if you don't have water, it makes it really hard to do anything resembling a homestead. Another thing that's really important is what kind of resources are you going to need on your piece of property. We already talked about water, that's probably the biggest one. But what about wood? If you can buy a piece of property that has wood on it and you have a sawmill, you've already owned some of the lumber just by purchasing the property that you're going to need to build the house. In our instance, there was sand and gravel already separated on our property. Cement up where we're at was about $2,000 for one cement truckload when we were pouring the foundation for our garage. Now, it was very convenient to have that cement truck show up and be able to pour the whole thing. And I suspect when I pour the footings for our house, we're going to pay that. But if I just need to put in a block deck here or a small sidewalk or something, having that sand and gravel where I can readily mix my own cement will be a cost savings. So you just have to know what resources you want to have on your piece of property. If you're going to raise animals, is there pasture? Is there sunlight? Is there grass? So choosing the right piece of property is huge. The next thing we learned in a big way was to prioritize your tasks. While you can do almost any task at any time, the amount of time it takes you is going to be significantly different depending on the time of year. For instance, I pulled off a bunch of roofing that's going to go onto my house. I did it in January. Not a great time of the year to be up working on a roof, especially in an area that gets a couple feet of snow during the winter. I spent a lot of time clearing off snow, waiting for snow to melt, just to be able to pull the roofing. Pulling the roofing, the actual work, probably only took me about 10 or 12 hours, but all the preparation up to that point took another 10 or 15 hours easily, because I had to contend with the snow. I had to wait until it melted off. Now, I didn't have any choice. This opportunity came when it came, but I could have planned that. June or July would have been a great time, and it would have gone super fast. We had to ask ourselves what will get us closest to our goal. For instance, we're building the garage first. Now, to a guy, that makes a lot of sense. Who needs a house if you have a garage? But obviously to my wife, she looks at it a little differently. However, In this instance, the area that we're going to be homesteading in gets a lot of rain. Working in the rain, if you can do it, is difficult. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. It's hard on equipment. If you end up leaving a $300 saw out in the rain and you destroy it, that's a huge investment you've got to replace. By having a large structure with a roof, I can build the walls, I can build the supports, I can do many of the things, maybe the flooring. I can do all of those things under the cover of the roof, and it gets me way farther ahead. Also in the winter, obviously it gets not a lot of daylight in the winter up in Alaska. By having a big garage, I can put some lights in. I don't have to start at 7 and end at 4 because I'm out of light. I can work much longer hours, and that'll get me closer to the goal. Another thing that took priority for us, we want to have fruit tree. You don't get fruit the year after you plant a fruit tree. It's going to take a while. And so although like the rest of the things that we want to grow up there are taking a back seat, things like fruit trees, berries, those sort of plants that take a while to get established, we planted those our first year because we wanted to make sure that they had a good chance to get started. I've already touched on it, but as you're looking at the tasks that need to be done, you got to remember weather and daylight. Again, up in that area it rains a lot, and so if you're pouring a foundation in a big rainstorm, it's not going to be as strong, it's not going to look as nice. So you got to work around the times of the year when you know you have a better chance of it being dry. And so that planning and prioritizing is huge to being successful on a homestead. Another thing I learned was that for me, learning new skills wasn't really optional. One of the biggest costs you can have in building anything is labor. If you have to pay somebody for their time, that's going to cost you a lot of money. And you have to weigh that. If you have a fantastic job where you can make a large amount of money in a short time, then you may be better off paying somebody to build for you. If you have a less well-paying job and you have more time, then learning those skills is going to save you a lot of money. Another thing, particularly this last couple of years, if you're using other people, you have to work around their schedule. If you're framing contractor, your electrician, or your plumber, or the guy that's going to pour the cement for you, they have a schedule. They've got people booked. And so now you're at the mercy of their schedule. And so that may delay you for a few days if you're waiting on them for the next important step. Another thing for me, learning new skills is just a whole lot of fun. Trying something new, you're not going to be as good at it as the guy that does it for a living. And some things that might be important. Obviously, if you're not good with electricity, then you don't want to be your own electrician. So you have to weigh that. But there's a lot of things that you can learn. Just in the last year and a half, I've relearned how to drive a Bobcat, drive a Mini X. Never done that before. A man lift. I'd never really used a chainsaw before. I learned how to do a sawmill. I've been learning how to weld. Never used a scaffold before. Learned how to use a boom truck. I installed a very basic solar panel system. Then of course I couldn't be sharing all of this with you if I hadn't learned how to do camera and editing skills. Those are all skills that I didn't have a year and a half ago. And having those skills has made life way easier. And it's going to make learning the next skills even easier. One of the other important things we learned is that things will go wrong. For the most part, although it seems like a big deal at the time because you had this thing that you wanted to get done, if you roll with the punches, it ends up not being that big of a deal. A lot of times, things that seem really big when you're in the middle of them things that go wrong end up not being that big of a deal. Part of the skill of dealing with things that go wrong is learning to be able to shift your focus, or to find when something goes wrong in one place, you either got to learn how to shift to something else where you can use your time better, or you have to learn how to figure out a way to overcome that. For instance, installing my bigger batteries, like a lot of things went wrong there for me. The first thing that went wrong was that I didn't have a way to lift them once I started pulling them apart. They had these brackets, but I didn't have chain links that would fit in the holes in the brackets. Suddenly I had these big batteries I didn't have a way to lift. I sat back, I thought about it, and then I came up with the idea of taking some bolts that I did have, running them through the holes and through the chain. Now, to some people that was probably intuitive. To me, that was a big obstacle, and it really stood in my way. But if you watched that video, things still didn't go right. I got everything all set and ready to go. It's kind of important that those batteries be charging. And then I couldn't find the metric bolts that I needed to put those batteries together. So they're sitting for all winter, not charging. Chances are that's not going to be good for them, and it may end up costing me some money. Or I may even have to replace them all, which would be kind of a big deal, but there's nothing I can do about it. And so I just had to switch to other things. And then it also gives me a chance to brainstorm and come up with ways that, if, say, those batteries won't charge, what's my next step? Where am I going to go from here? And then honestly, for me, learning how to adapt and change and come up with solutions to problems as they present themselves, that's half the fun of homesteading. Like, if everything went perfectly, would I go to bed at night feeling like I'd accomplished so much? I don't think so. The second most important thing that we learned so far in our homesteading adventure is give yourself time to be able to find the things you need at a bargain. If you have a really tight timeline and you need something, you're going to have to pay market price for that thing. And if you have a lot of money, or you've saved up enough money to accomplish your homestead, then that's probably not a big deal. If you're trying to do it in an economic and frugal way, then that can be a huge deal. For instance, the roofing that we ended up essentially getting, not for free, because it cost me 4 or 5 days worth of labor, but for very cheap. If I was going to buy that amount of roofing, it would cost about $15,000. Now that's a significant amount of money. Again, if you're building a house, maybe $15,000 isn't that much money, but if I don't have to put $15,000 towards the roof, then I can spend that. Maybe I can get better floors. That'll make my wife happier. By giving yourself enough time to find things at a bargain, you can really cut down on costs. Another thing is windows. Where I'm at right now, there's a Habitat for Humanity. They often have windows for half or a third of the price. Also Craigslist, those kind of places. You can pick up things you're going to need for pennies on the dollar quite often. Oftentimes, like, if people know you're looking for things, they'll help you out as well. Like, it was a good friend of mine that let me know about that roofing. The batteries I came across, somebody was getting rid of part of their hydroelectric system, but those batteries were still good, so it cost me significantly less. Now, for the most important thing that I've learned in this year and a half or so that I've been started homesteading, to me this is an ironic lesson, because essentially my wife and I are spending a lot of time and energy trying to get away from people. Where we live is too crowded. We want to go someplace with less people. But the most important thing I've learned is that relationships with people are the most important part of homesteading. Number one, for me and my wife, if we weren't on the same page, this would be something that could drive us apart. But because we're on the same page, we're both enjoying it, it's actually something that's bringing us together. Another thing, my children, I know not very good at asking people for help, but because I need help and my children volunteer, I've actually got to spend several days working hard with my children, but it was good quality time that now they're adults. I don't get to spend that much time with them, but because they were willing to help me out, we actually got to spend a lot of really good quality time, and you can't replace that. These are things that I'll always remember. Friends, like I had a group of friends that came up with me and helped on the garage. Of course, now they have dibs on coming up to Alaska and coming fishing with me in the future, but without their help, that garage would be a 4-year project. But having friends that were willing to come up and help, that made a huge difference. Not only friends that you already have, but relationships with new friends are huge. The area that I'm moving to, I don't know the people, I don't know the resources. The friends that I've made have been instrumental in me finding a way to be able to accomplish all the things that I want to accomplish. If I didn't have those new friendships, I'd be a quarter of the way to where I'm at now. I haven't always been somebody that likes to make new friends, but that's one of the things that I'm learning, is that those relationships are really important. Also, neighbors. Up there, you really depend on your neighbors a lot. If you're missing something as simple as a nut to a bolt, that could cost you 3 hours worth of driving to the hardware store. But if you can go over to your neighbor and see if he has one, and he does, you're going to visit for a half hour or so and get to know them better, which is a win. And it saves you 2.5 hours worth of driving. And then also, there's nothing like being a good neighbor, helping other people out when they need it. That's a rundown of the things we've learned in the last 1.5 years or so of homesteading. I expect there will be a lot more lessons, but hopefully those lessons will help you out if you're thinking about homesteading, or I suspect those lessons could be pretty important just in an everyday, ordinary life.